The warming of the world's oceans has long been seen as a distant, almost invisible threat, something happening deep below the surface, out of sight and seemingly out of reach. Yet this invisible danger is now turning into a very real crisis for millions of people. As the oceans absorb over 90% of the excess heat from greenhouse gas emissions, they are beginning to change global weather systems in ways that directly endanger human health and survival. The term ocean-driven heat captures more than rising sea temperatures. It represents a growing cascade of climate disruptions, from marine heat waves and shifting rainfall to intensifying droughts and deadly storms. Mapping the most vulnerable regions reveals a stark picture. The world's poorest, most densely populated, and least prepared communities stand on the front lines of this unfolding disaster. Coastal populations across South and Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, and parts of Africa are among the most exposed. In Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the Philippines, tens of millions live just a few meters above sea level. As the ocean warms, it expands, and with melting polar ice, it drives higher tides and more powerful storm surges. Floodwaters contaminate drinking sources with salt, destroy farmland, and spread waterborne diseases such as cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. For families who already rely on fragile infrastructure and limited healthcare, even one major flooding event can erase decades of progress. The psychological toll is equally heavy: displacement, loss of livelihood, and the uncertainty of rebuilding in places that may no longer be habitable create a quiet epidemic of anxiety and despair. These are not distant scenarios. They are unfolding now, with millions forced to migrate inland, often to overcrowded cities unprepared to absorb them. Island nations like the Maldives, Tuvalu, and Kiribati face an even more existential threat. Rising ocean temperatures bleach coral reefs, destroying the natural barriers that protect shorelines. When these reefs die, coastal erosion accelerates, leaving entire communities exposed to waves that were once absorbed by living coral. The loss of fisheries adds another dimension to the crisis. Declining fish stocks due to warmer, more acidic waters mean less food and fewer jobs for island populations. The result is a slow-motion humanitarian collapse, where climate change is not just an environmental issue but a direct attack on health and survival. Malnutrition rises as fish protein becomes scarce, infectious disease spreads as stagnant floodwaters linger, and heat-related illness grows more frequent as temperatures soar. Inland, the dangers of ocean-driven heat are no less severe. Regions such as the Sahel in Africa, Central America, and South Asia are now experiencing prolonged heat waves tied to shifting ocean currents and disrupted monsoon patterns. These heat waves are not the dry, tolerable kind. They are humid, suffocating, and often deadly. Without access to reliable electricity or air conditioning, poor and rural communities are forced to endure temperatures that exceed the human body's natural limits. Heat stroke, dehydration, and kidney failure become common in such conditions, and agricultural productivity plummets as crops wither in scorched soil. What begins as a temperature anomaly ends as a health crisis, cascading through every part of life: food, water, shelter, and even social stability. Urban populations are also vulnerable, particularly in megacities built along coasts such as Mumbai, Lagos, and Rio de Janeiro. These cities are heat traps, concrete landscapes that store and re-radiate the day's heat long into the night. When combined with ocean-driven humidity, the result is a lethal combination of high wet bulb temperatures, which prevent the human body from cooling through sweat. Air pollution, already severe in many of these regions, reacts with the higher heat to create toxic smog. The poorest residents, often living in informal settlements without trees or ventilation, suffer the most. Infants, the elderly, and people with cardiovascular or respiratory conditions face elevated risks of death during extreme heat episodes. Even healthy adults can experience heat exhaustion that impairs work performance, driving economic losses that further entrench poverty. The Northern Hemisphere is not immune. Parts of Southern Europe, the Middle East, and North America are beginning to experience secondary effects from oceanic heat redistribution. Jet stream disruptions and marine heat waves in the North Atlantic and Pacific are creating prolonged periods of drought or intense rainfall. Mediterranean countries like Greece and Italy are enduring record-breaking heat that fuels wildfires, worsening air quality and releasing fine particulate matter that penetrates deep into human lungs. In the United States, coastal communities in Florida, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast face twin threats of rising seas and hurricane intensification, both linked to warmer oceans. These storms carry massive public health implications, flooding hospitals, spreading mold and vector-borne diseases, and leaving behind long-term trauma for survivors. The warnings from climate scientists are increasingly blunt. Ocean-driven heat is not a distant forecast, but a living reality reshaping every continent. As the oceans continue to absorb and redistribute energy unevenly, new climate extremes will emerge in regions that have never experienced them before. The health consequences will not be limited to the most vulnerable nations. They will spread through trade disruptions, food price spikes, and migration pressures. A crisis of this magnitude will not respect borders. Wealthy countries may have stronger infrastructure, but they are not insulated from the fallout, especially as global instability and humanitarian displacement accelerate. The darker truth is that adaptation alone will not be enough. As ocean systems destabilize, the pace and intensity of change could exceed our capacity to respond. Without rapid global emission reductions, coastal cities may face chronic flooding by mid-century. Tropical regions could become uninhabitable during summer months, and food systems may collapse in places that sustain billions. This is a trajectory that carries moral weight as much as physical danger because it reflects collective choices, how humanity values future generations, how it prioritizes equity, and whether it learns from the warnings before they become irreversible realities. To map the vulnerable regions is to map the fragile heartbeat of the planet itself. The zones of risk, coastal deltas, small islands, arid farmlands, and dense megacities are where the consequences of ocean-driven heat will first become unbearable. If those regions fall into crisis, the rest of the world will follow. There is no distant safe zone in a world whose climate system is connected by the same ocean currents now destabilizing under human pressure. The map of vulnerability is, ultimately, a mirror. It reflects not just geography, but our shared responsibility, and the stark reminder that the line between safety and suffering is growing thinner with every degree the oceans warm.